Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for Articulation Day. Our focus today is going to be differentiated instruction. But before we get into that, I just want to take a moment and thank everyone for filling out our faculty files, for taking the time to fill out our Google form. I am going to get into those results a little bit later, and I hope you enjoy them. They are some of them are very funny, some of them are very interesting, but thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to do that today. So, like I said, today's focus is going to be on differentiated instruction. Sometimes it's called differentiation, sometimes it's called DI, and it's an instructional approach that acknowledges the reality that students are different in ways that can significantly affect their learning. It contends that teaching and learning are more effective when teachers are proactive and plan to address their students' interests and differences. So, the most important thing when we go through and start to talk about differentiation is that keeping in mind that mindset does matter. So a teacher who doesn't believe in the capacity of every student to learn or to succeed is unlikely to invest what it takes to ensure the growth of every student. A student who doesn't feel as though they are believed in is unlikely to be successful because they see their own perceived shortcomings reflected in others. So as we go through this, we were talking, one of the questions I asked you about was your comfort level with differentiation. And you can see we don't have a perfect bell curve, but a little bit to the right here. What I thought might have been an interesting question to ask in conjunction with this, but I wanted to make sure I kept it totally anonymous, was also your grade level, because it would be interesting to see if early elementary school teachers are more comfortable with differentiation, or if if there's patterns of comfort based on grade levels. So that might be a good conversation to have within your groups today, but I thought that would be an interesting distinction to also look at. Okay. So I did ask you what the best definition of differentiated instruction was on the survey, and I was very pleased to see that almost everybody got the correct answer, which is B, a process where teachers plan and deliver lessons that accommodate the varying learning styles, interests, and ability of all students. When we take that into mind and we think about differentiation, what are acceptable and not recommended ways to differentiate? Well, when I asked you this, I gave you all of these different selections that you could choose from, but it was a trick question. They're all acceptable. The content, which it did seem that, I'm going to go here for a second. Right here, you'll see that the content had the most not recommended responses out of all of them. And I think what happened here is people were confusing content with standards. We're not differentiating the standards. You can't do that with differentiation, but you can differentiate the content. And the content's what the teacher teaches and what the student is asked to learn. Sometimes this is also enrichment. You can also differentiate the process. And that's how students make sense of what they're asked to learn, how they come to own it, and how they make it their own. It's the relevancy of that. Sometimes it's learning activities, sometimes it's a task, but you can adjust those to address your students' readiness, interest levels, or their learning preferences. Sometimes kids might work alone, sometimes they might work in pairs, sometimes it might be a small group. That's all of the process. The product is the vehicle in which students show you that they have learned what you're asking them to learn, that they've mastered the standards that you are teaching. So, product can be multiple things. Product can be a test. Yes, you can differentiate tests. Tests are not one size fits all. I will give you an example. My son is very good at math. He is not good at reading comprehension. So unlike when a lot of us were in school and you just had to do the problem, now you have to derive what the problem is from these word problems. So Troy generally does not do well on his math tests. Well, he had a teacher recently who sat down with him and read him the word problem, and he got an 80% on that test. And it all was because he could hear it, and he didn't have to deal with the reading comprehension, and he could just do the math. That is a differentiated approach to a test. You could give tests verbally, multiple choice. You could give graphic organizers, all sorts of ways that you could do it. You're still not changing your expectations of the level of mastery, and you are not changing the standards in which are being taught. You are just changing how the student is able to show you that they have mastered their content. Student affect is another big one. A lot of us, especially in high school, student affect is different sometimes day to day, sometimes minute to minute, and that could have a big effect on how students are learning that day. In addition to student readiness, how are they coming in prepared? Cultures also have a lot to do with how our students are learning and the importance that education is placed on. All right, so we talked about that. Here's some of the results, and just to give you an idea, about 150 people responded to the survey. And out of that 150 people, that's not everybody, but it's a good chunk. So I, again, thank you. But we're just 150 people. We have 1,000 students at the high school alone. So when you think about this, we're going through and just think about how this would translate to the larger group of our 2,000 students in district. So here we have our birth order. I think it's very interesting and a little funny that almost 40% of the teaching staff was born first. I wonder if there's any correlation between the two. But see, there's a lot of different experiences here just growing up in the household on how we interact with others. Also, the 5 core personality traits, I thought this was very interesting. 40% is agreeableness, followed up by 25% of conscientious. So you look at this and you think about your classroom. This is very probably similar to the things that you might see in your classroom. I also thought it was very interesting that the 5 core personality traits seem to be something that's beneficial to teaching, every single one of them in their own way. Conscientious and agreeableness, absolutely. And neuroticism never hurt. So 3 versions of a lesson came in number 1 here with almost 55%, reteaching a lesson 10 times or acting it out. So there's all different preferences on the delivery, on the process. What would you like to do? What would you rather do? 55% of you said horror movie with your best friend, a romantic comedy with your worst enemy came in 3rd, and a historical drama with your mother-in-law. Again, these are just answers that you guys gave, but the reasoning behind them can be very different too. So when you're looking at all of these things, again, you could think of this possibly as your product. What would you like to do? How would you like to show me? And this is what you chose. This one cracked me up. So theme song, 55% of you want a theme song to play every time you walk into a room. I would love to know what some of these theme songs are. 12% only wanted a narration of a voiceover of your day-to-day activities. And 33% wanted the laugh track. 36% of you wanted to stay in the here and now, and 51% of you wanted to travel to the past. Only about 13% want to go to the future. But this is a whole other conversation we could have in and of itself. As a history teacher, I really want to dive into this. Again, we're split between money and time, very, very close, I would say, almost 60-40, but still that's pretty close because both things are very valuable. And favorite pastime. I think this might be one of my favorite slides because there were so many options for you to choose from. And I love that there's my 30% reading buddies on here. But just look at, you don't even need to know what all the slivers are to know that we are all vastly different in how we like to spend our time and what we like to do. And that goes back to differentiation too, because we are all approaching things differently. We approach our lesson plans differently. Our students approach their learning differently. And if you can find what's relevant and what's exciting for them, if you know who they are, if you make those connections, the relationships are really at the basic level of what's important when you talk about differentiation. So again, here's different ways to differentiate. Students, you can differentiate by readiness, interests and abilities, learning profile. We've kind of talked about all of these already. And lesson design, again, content, what is taught, how is it taught, and the product, how is learning assessed. This was interesting to me. So I asked you guys to rank from number 1 as the least effective to from least effective to most effective. And 7 was most effective. So if you look here, there's a lot of different opinions. And I don't know if they're different opinions based on what you feel is the best way for students to learn, or if it's your comfort level, and that could be a good conversation to have today too, on how to move forward. Again, some of these things I'm very interested to see how these answers would have broken down by building. I think that there's a big variance on, like for example, looking at lecture in the elementary schools versus looking at lecture in the high school. Very different in terms of how often it's done, the manner in which it's done, discussion, teaching others. And if you look here, teaching others is the number 1 learning method to have retention, and lecture is the least. So these conversations and these kind of strategies are things that we will talk about more in depth moving forward. And I know that, again, you guys have a good basis on what differentiation is. However, nobody's expecting you to be an expert at it at this moment. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the learning environment. This is where we are. We want to work on general awareness. We want to create respect for student differences. We do this in our classrooms already. The curriculum, we want to plan for student engagement. We want to be able to find points of relevance for our students. Instruction, we want, again, engagement. We want to introduce grouping, low prep differentiation. Nobody's looking for you to upend the world right now. And strategies at a pace that you can sustain. And assessment, learning about and implementing assessments for learning. Eventually, we want to get over to the right side of the screen. This is not tomorrow. This is not next week. This is a process. This is a journey we are going to go on together. So, again, high teacher-student connections. Those relationships are key for so many different things. Curriculum, engagement of each student. Most of the time, curriculum design and decisions informed by student input. Instruction, proactive differentiation. This is not like on the spot. This is, okay, I know my kids. This is what gets them going. This is what draws them in. This is how we're going to do it. Consistent use of flexible grouping, and those groups can be made in all sorts of different ways. Readiness, interest, and learning profile differentiation. Also assessment, that's consistently differentiated, not just a one-off. Tests, assessments in terms of assignments, all of those types of things. Benchmarks, how are they differentiated? So moving forward, really what I just want to tell you is that you see this quote from me all the time. It's not that I don't know that I put it up all the time. I just think it's so very, very true. The people that you're sitting with in the room today are people who do what you do with different kids at different ages, but you all have the same passion for teaching. You all have the same passion for your content areas and for your grade levels. So with this, I just want to let you know that we will be moving forward together. We will be working on this. This is something that I will provide training on throughout the whole next year. And I hope that you have very meaningful conversations today. There are questions to guide you in your folders. And if you have any questions after today is through, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to meet with you. So have a great day, guys. Thank you so much, and have a good weekend.